Good afternoon, everyone. It is 2:45 in New York on November 19th. It is 12:45 in Wyoming. Welcome to weeks 12 and 13 on Erickson, another invigorating episode of Foundations of Development with Professor Ginobili. I'm your host, Professor Ginobili. I would like to apologize for getting this presentation out so late. A lot has been going on. First, with work, these are explanations, not excuses. Grading, parent-teacher conferences. For those of you who are pre-service teachers and going to go into the field, you will know the stress of grading time and parent-teacher conferences. Then this week in particular, I found out that I had lots and lots and lots of yellow jackets trying to dorm, not in the college sense, trying to dorm in my apartment. They've been lying dormant, I guess, for the last few weeks. They're slowly but surely waking up. If you see me pause the presentation, that's because I'm going to kill another yellow jacket. So I apologize to you who don't like when I kill yellow jackets, but I've been trying to get as many just to kick him out the window when I see him coming in, but I am not having extra roommates that I don't need. But anyway, here we go. Erickson. First, to start out with our agenda, our to-do list. Tomorrow, homework 3 is your nurture essay. Some of you who did the survey have been using the survey to do homework 3. Just let me know if you still have an outstanding homework pass and you want to use it for homework 3. Just let me know. Thanksgiving break is this week. Happy Thanksgiving from my family to yours. If you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, I know a lot of my students who just don't celebrate any holiday. Enjoy the week off. But I'll be thinking about all of you next week. I put Young. I want to make sure that his name is Carl Young. I don't know, for some reason. Young Psychology. It's Carl with a C, not with a K. There we go. I'm confusing Karl Marx with Carl Jung. That's what happens sometimes when you're doing 20,000 things at one time. But when we come back from Thanksgiving break, we will be doing Carl Jung with a C. Then your final reflection paper will be due. December 5th to the 11th will be the extra credit module. I'm going to do it on the humanists. It's extra credit, which means you don't have to do it. But if you do it, I will give you extra credit on your lowest assignment. It will also serve as a catch-up week. And then December 12th to the 16th is your final exam. Your final exam will be due on December 16th. We're going to take a look at the roadmap right now, and then we're going to dive into Erickson's theory of psychosocial development. So here we go with our chart, our nature and nurture chart. We've come a long way. We've done the whole left side. We've done majority of the right side. After break, we still have to do Young. Trying to see where Young is on the, here he is. So we're over here with Erickson with his psychosocial development. Carl Jung is part of the psychoanalytic development. Young is going to talk a lot about culture and how culture affects our development. So stay tuned for that. This week, the reason why Erickson's closer to the right side is, as the name implies, psychosocial development. His theory deals with how the social aspects of our lives develop our mind, our psyche, our identity is going to be a major part of Erickson's theory. So with that, let us dive deep into Erickson. Here we go. So Erickson was born in 1902, died in 1994, 20th century man, German American. He is a developmental psychologist, so he's still part of the nature, but he's also a psychoanalyst who knew Freud. He's best known for his theory of psychosocial development, and he is most famous for coining the phrase identity crisis, which I'm sure all of you have heard at least once in your lifetime. He came to the field after spending time in art, which is interesting because a lot of our theorists kind of stumbled into psychology at some point. It turns out, as we said, not only that, but several of them were artists who then became psychologists. Moreover, he didn't have even a bachelor's degree, which is interesting because he ended up at both Harvard and Yale, which you definitely need a doctorate in order to teach there in today's day and age. He's the 12th most cited psychologist of all time, and his son Kai Erickson is a noted American sociologist. This was a note from Dr. Russo. He also knew how to use a blow dryer, as opposed to our friend Skinner, who did not. So here we go. Why study Erickson? Because, like all good theories, his became fertile ground for more research. He is a seminal theorist. His theory explains so much about behavior, especially if you are into social emotional learning. Knowing Erickson is very important because his crises, as we're going to see them today, really help in understanding how to expand our understanding and knowledge of social emotional learning and social emotional behavior. As a stage theorist, his stages can be used to predict behavior. So when a child is at a certain age and within a certain crisis, uh, his theory allows us to predict very closely, actually, where their behavior is going to be. It also helps you meet your students where they're at, not where you want them to be. I think this is also very important in terms of understanding how to approach uh, discipline and classroom management. Oftentimes, we want to discipline our students in making them the type of young people we want them to be. And we have to realize that in terms of, as we saw with our other theorists, in terms of their psychological development, their social emotional development, their moral development, they may not be where we want them to be. Therefore, we have to meet them where they're actually at. Erickson's psychosocial development contains 8 stages, each characterized by a central conflict. His first 5 are in childhood and adolescence. We're going to go more in detail. So instead of me just reading through the 5 and the 3, I'm just going to go straight into the next few slides because we are going to discuss them further. All you really need to know is that the first 5 are in childhood and adolescence, and the last 3 are specifically in adulthood. So the first stage is trust versus mistrust. This is in infancy. Basically, the child must come to trust that his or her needs will be met. Mom and dad cannot demonstrate any sort of reluctance in doing so. And if you remember back with attachment, this relates to also, you know, knowing that mom and dad are going to come back. Trust ensues when the needs are met. That is trust of the caregiver and the child, him or herself. So ultimately, with this conflict, it is the child coming to terms on whether or not to trust and mistrust individuals, starting with their parents, most likely then with siblings and other family members, and then ultimately with strangers. And this is a very important conflict because if this conflict isn't resolved, I'm going to say, using the word over the right way, this can cause trust and mistrust issues later on. All of these conflicts are all about whether or not these can be resolved, because if they're not resolved, issues will show up later on in the child's life. Second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. This is the toddler to preschool age. This corresponds with Freud's anal stage. The child seeks to meet and exceed the parents' expectations for potty training. And if you remember with the discussion about potty training, a lot of it was also about autonomy and being in charge versus, the parents, I don't want to say force, but more in the sense of get the child in line. Like, you have to be potty trained because that's what we do in a society. We cannot be not potty trained in modern society. Um, Shame of not being able to do it, and then autonomy results when also the child can do it. So that is the second stage: autonomy versus shame and doubt. And even though this is about potty training, again, if this conflict is not resolved later on, there could be issues in terms of the autonomy of the child, um, being overly ashamed, being overly doubtful of whether or not one can complete a task. So, again, also understand that even though these conflicts are specific to a certain age, it's all about the resolution of this conflict, to prevent or to notice issues with that conflict later on in life. Next. Initiative versus guilt. This is in preschool years. It's the last of the preschool crises. It corresponds with Freud's phallic stage. The child takes control over feelings, including those of rivalry, and guilt accrues if the child cannot achieve this. And then an interesting stage is the industry versus inferiority stage. This is during school years. It corresponds with Freud's latency stage. The child must apply himself or herself to learning in school. And this has a lot to do with learning development itself. So the child must understand that the child has limitations, whatever it may be. Maybe it is in a certain subject matter. Maybe it is in the way of learning. Maybe the child has special needs, and that's part of the child's limitations. But it's during these years that the child must come to terms with limitations, especially in terms of learning, to face up to those limitations, then feel competent relative to their peers. And again, this has a lot to do with our discussion over the last few weeks on self-efficacy. Failure results in a kind of inferiority. So when the child fails during this time, the child will feel inferior not only to their peers, but probably to their parents, probably to siblings, whoever is in their lives. So it's also important during this stage to show students what they are industrial at. What is it that they can do? This is where growth mindset comes in. This is where positive mindset comes in as well. Because if we allow the students to focus so much on failure or their limitations, it definitely comes out later on in adolescence, and how they relate to themselves as well as their peers. In high school, and I can tell you this as a high school teacher, identity versus role confusion, both academically, socially, and I would also say at the societal level. In puberty, an identity is needed. Identity at many levels. We have identity at the social level, the sexual level, every type of level you could think of. There is some sort of identity that the adolescent is trying to, um, maybe assign is not the right word, but discover. They're trying to discover who they are during this time. This identity develops confidence that others see us as we see ourselves. Identity is also important in terms of the identity crisis time, um, to understand like how we have to see ourselves first before we allow others to see us how we want them to see us. And we have to understand that with adolescence, that we have to be sensitive to that. Selection, if only preliminary, of an occupation. Who we are is identified by what we do. Um, so I also think of this also later on as an adult. This is at the societal level. Oftentimes, and I've done this over the years. Michael, who are you? I'm a teacher. Well, no, I'm not a teacher. That's something that I do. That's not something who I am. Now, a lot of people, when they talk to me, they say that you're such a teacher. Maybe it's because of everything else about me that I've allowed people see about myself. Those are the types of skills that allows me to be an effective teacher. But I definitely don't first identify myself as a teacher. Um, so occupation selection is important as part of this identity um confusion time, but we should also be mindful, and especially when we're teaching young people, that what you do isn't who you are, because that leads to later on, later on in adulthood, when one retires, if they cling their identity so much by their occupation that when retirement comes, there's another crisis that happens on the other end of of what's the word? uh Usefulness. Like this idea, am I useful anymore? Am I needed anymore? The last few weeks I was catching up on Fuller House, and I think it's interesting where uh the dad, Danny Tanner, has retired from Wake Up San Francisco, and what does he does? Like a lot of retired dads, he ends up binge shopping at Costco. And Stephanie says, and one thing, we have more pudding cups than a retirement home. Like Danny attached himself to the idea of providing for his family, and my job is part of who I am. That on the other end, when he's now retired, he thinks his usefulness is defined by how much food he buys at Costco, because he saw that as part of providing for his family. Um, Role confusion results when all of this cannot be done internally. There's over identification with popular heroes or cliques, and can continue well into adulthood. In late high school and into adulthood, we have intimacy versus isolation. This deals with the ability to commit to a relationship without losing one's identity. Identity must precede intimacy. This is what was one of the important things um, about Erickson. Um, that it is difficult to be intimate with another if you don't know who you are first. You can't give to somebody else unless you are secure with who you are first. So that was one of the things that Erickson said in this particular crisis. Then moving forward, we have generativity versus stagnation. This is the empty nest syndrome, as it's often called. This is what I was referring to with Danny Tanner and Fuller House. Excuse me, the sense of needing to be needed. Now, the textbook does a really good job in explaining that while the focus initially is on child rearing and helping children in general, it's related more so about guiding the next generation and leveraging one's experience. So it's not necessarily parents, because Erickson does talk about how other vocations, whether it's single teachers, if you go into teaching, if you go into nursing, he even talks about religious priests, brothers, nuns. They don't have children biologically, but many end up working with children, and this is part of this generativity of, passing on to the next generation versus stagnation. Stagnation is failure, um, in the sense of having accomplished nothing. So um part of it you can think of as like, this is part of this is like midlife crisis. Could be a part of this section, although midlife crisis could also be a part of that intimacy section, because midlife crisis is often about, I haven't lived, I haven't figured out who I am yet. So an individual's trying to recapture earlier years and try to figure out who they are. But I also think midlife crisis is related to this thing of feelings of stagnation. I'm in my midlife. I haven't experienced, or I haven't done uh enough that I wanted to do, and therefore it may not be in the traditional midlife crisis sense of, I'm going to buy a Corvette, but maybe it's like, I'm going to take on so many activities in order to give back, which may or may not necessarily be good. Um, so that's the stage of generativity versus stagnation. Then we have ego integrity versus despair, which is an older age. Despair results from not having suitably handled the preceding crises. People are disgusted with themselves or not. This is like really the tug of war within this particular crisis. An individual may realize that it may be too late to resolve any outstanding crisis. Um, well adjusted means one has brought integrity into the ego. Remember, going back to Freud with the id, ego, and superego. Uh, this reduces the need for a mask or a persona to almost nothing. But we don't grow old as much as we become more fully ourselves. So the idea of being well with one's life, finding peace and harmony. What I like about Erickson, um, it's very uh if any of you were able to uh see me in class and talk to me in class, I like to refer back to Taoism, uh and especially with yin and yang, because it's all about dynamic equilibrium. It's all about this idea of, when we think of Taoism, we like peace and harmony and everything's coming together. And reality, the yin and yang and harmony is about this idea that everything is in constant chaos and motion, and it's about bringing balance within the chaos and confusion. Yin and yang, we often see it as the static circle, but it's supposed to be rotating. It's supposed to be in movement, because life is constantly changing. The universe is constantly changing. People are constantly changing. People are constantly in dynamic equilibrium. No one's ever um static. No one's ever together. No one's ever in one place. individuals are constantly moving from point A to point B to point C. And that's one of the great things about Erickson is this understanding of we're constantly going through these tugs of war. Um, I apologize. I think that's a house alarm if you hear something in the background. Nope, that's the police station. Something's going on in the neighborhood. All right. Some take home messages on Erickson, and we're almost done. I wanted to make this a quick lecture. Erickson proposed that psychosocial characteristics result from the resolution of these 8 conflicts. And again, just as I said before, resolution doesn't necessarily mean one and done. Resolution means coming to a sense of harmony in this balance within imbalance. Children are born with dispositions to respond to the world and to express their emotions in a certain way. They become increasingly able to regulate their emotions in socially acceptable, personally effective ways. As I said earlier, the social emotional learning, Erickson has a lot to do with social emotional learning. Some youngsters face serious emotional and behavioral challenges that require thoughtful accommodation from adults and sometimes preventional intervention. What's nice about having Erickson's theory of the 8 conflicts is that we can scaffold for young people conflict resolution within those conflicts. Main things to remember: memorize the 8 crises for the final exam. It's going to be on there. Depending on your grade level, you will see them unfold. If you're in elementary school and even middle school, you're going to see more of them unfold. In high school, you're not going to see as many of them unfold because only 1 or 2 of them apply to high school years. As you teach and witness development, get out your notes. You're going to see them. They're going to be there. Help children thoughtfully around crisis negotiation, as I said earlier. Scaffold for them crisis resolution, conflict resolution, particularly important as to frustration tolerance. Within these crises, as young people are developing their identities, they're going to be frustrated. And what's important for them to know is that frustration is going to happen. In a similar sense, I have a lot of young people, for example, this year I'm working with students who are pursuing college courses in junior and senior year. And the moment they feel frustration, they want to simply give up. And I'm trying to mentor them and trying to make them see it's like you have to push yourself to the point where you find what your limit is. Because if you constantly give up too soon, you're never going to see how far you can go. And I'm glad I'm almost done because I got some yellow jackets that I'm going to have to kill in a second. There's only 2. All right. Last thing, role confusion and vocation as we saw in the different stations. That's it for Erickson. I'm going to go and kill some yellow jackets. Please forgive me for any of you who are offended that I'm killing the yellow jackets. I apologize, but that is it for today. Happy Thanksgiving. Please be restful. I hope everything's okay with what's going on outside. The police department is definitely going crazy right now. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. Have a good break. And I will see you on the other side when we talk about Carl Jung. Carl with a C, not with a K. Have a good day. Bye-bye.